Why did America's air defenses suddenly and remarkably fail on 9/11? The official account of what happened that day has changed multiple times and in multiple ways. The final account appears in the 9/11 Commission report, and it's based on this idea that everyone in the United States military and everyone at the FAA were lying, basically calling them liars in the official 9/11 Commission report. So what really happened that day with the United States air defenses? Let's ask Kevin Ryan. He's been investigating this for years. He's the co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies, and he joins us now. Kevin, great to see you. This is a piece of the story that has been I'll admit, it's been a blind spot for me, right? We focus a lot on the hijackers, the buildings, the demolition, etc. But the air defenses, the air defense systems, this has been a really sort of a blind spot for me, and I'm really curious what caught your attention about it for you that you wanted to really start diving into this piece of the story?
Well, I've been investigating 9/11 for 21 years, and I began looking into the World Trade Center destruction, but as co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies now for 18 years, I've also been involved in researching the air defense failures. As you said, there were multiple changing stories, and that's what catches a lot of people's attention when they change the story and backtrack in a number of ways that make, for example, the military or NORAD look better. That's suspicious, and that's when people start looking a little bit closer. And I'd be happy to go through those stories with you to talk about exactly why they might have done that and what the final story looks like.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's paint a picture first for our audience here. What is the official story that we've all been told? And maybe it's safe for me to call it the fake story, the cover-up story, the 9/11 Commission report story. So what is the fake story that we've all been forced to swallow since 9/11?
Well, the final story from the 9/11 Commission had to do with failures of communication, and critically, failures of communication between the FAA and what's called NORAD. And the NORAD is basically the military air defenses. And so the 9/11 Commission said that really the problem came down to just incredible communication failures between these two agencies. And there's remarkable facts about that as well that we should discuss. But basically, they told us in the end that the military was not notified about the planes until after they had crashed. They got 8 minutes notification on the first hijacking, but for the second, third, and fourth hijackings, we're told by the 9/11 Commission that the military was just never notified until after the planes had crashed. And of course, why that's remarkable, as you mentioned earlier, is that we were told by the military and the FAA previous to that, for a period of 3 years, that the military had been notified about all these planes, that they had actually gotten notification on Flight 175, the second plane, 20 minutes before it crashed. They had gotten notification about Flight 77, the third plane that crashed into the Pentagon, 14 minutes before it crashed. And they had gotten notification of Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania 47 minutes before it crashed. And so, just thinking about this, if we know the 9/11 Commission did admit finally that there were interceptor jets scrambled from 2 Air Force bases, and these are F-15 jets that fly at 1,900 miles per hour, so they could have reached New York City in 8 minutes, just immediately. And the others for the Pentagon and the United 93, those interceptor jets were F-16s, which flew also at 1,500 miles per hour. So they could have easily caught up with these hijacked aircraft. And so for 3 years, people were wondering, they were amazed why the military jets never caught up. And just to put it in perspective, in the year 2000, the military had scrambled aircraft to intercept errant aircraft 129 times in the year 2000. And they had scrambled jets 67 times in the first half of 2001, successfully, no problems. So the problem was for almost 2 hours on 9/11, the nation was left undefended in over the skies. I mean, the military didn't intercept any of these four aircraft, despite all of this notification and plenty of time for the jets to catch up. So it was amazing when we finally heard in the final report that, and this came from Philip Zelikow, who was the executive director of 9/11 Commission. If people don't know him, he's a professional myth maker, and
Right.
he wrote the outline for the 9/11 Commission report before the investigation began. But it was his idea to come up with a memorandum that basically said, well, we can't explain, in so many words, we can't explain this because they were never notified. So the military was never notified, so therefore they were off the hook. And, as you said, the FAA had already testified to the 9/11 Commission in contradiction to that, saying that the NORAD folks had been involved the entire time, had been in with phone bridges and communication bridges, had been in contact with FAA, knew everything FAA knew. And basically, as soon as a plane like those hijacked on 9/11 deviated from its course or failed to communicate or turned off its transponder, it was an automatic, no procedures really necessary, an automatic response between FAA and NORAD that interceptor jets would be scrambled. And that just didn't happen on 9/11. And that's one of the main reasons that people can see. There are a number of other reasons, but that the official count for 9/11 is just a giant lie.
It's unbelievable to me. What would be the purpose then of trying to hide that the military said, no, we knew about this. We could have been scrambled in minutes. I guess if you're sitting at home wondering, well, what's the purpose then of trying to hide that piece of the story? What's the purpose of that?
Well, one purpose is that if they did get the notification of 20 minutes on Flight 175, 14 minutes on Flight 77, and 47 minutes on Flight 93, they should have been able to catch up and intercept the jets. So if they had done that, if they had caught up and intercepted the jets, or I'm sorry, the hijacked aircraft, the airliners, they would have been able to, as they had before, look into the cockpit and see who was flying the planes. This is an important point
Right.
in 9/11 research right now, because a lot of people believe, and including myself, that the planes were actually remotely hijacked using technology that existed at the time and had been practiced that year, in the months leading up to 9/11. So if the interceptor jets had actually done this, they would have seen who was flying the planes. Now, there are a number of reasons why they didn't. One reason was that the aircraft flying to New York City the interceptor jets were told to form a holding pattern out in a practice area over the Atlantic. So instead of flying directly to New York City, they flew in a holding pattern over the Atlantic. And
Do we know do we know who would have given that order? No, don't go and intercept. So we now know that there were interceptor jets out there. They were scrambled, but told not to intercept those hijacked plane, but instead to go out in a holding pattern. Do we know who gave that order to stay in a holding pattern and not intercept them?
Yes, we do. We do know that those orders came from the Air Force headquarters and NEADS and the northeast sector of NORAD. And so it hasn't really been explained exactly why that happened, but we do know that happened, and we do know who gave the orders. The other inexplicable order that was given, particularly for the jets that were launched for Flight 77 and United 93, they were also sent out over the Atlantic in the wrong direction. Those orders were actually changed after launch, so they were scrambled on a heading to Washington, and then the orders were changed to head out over the Atlantic. And moreover, they were asked to fly at a small fraction of their speed, so subsonic speeds, right? These are jets that flew at multiple times the speed of sound, but yet they were asked to fly at subsonic speeds. So they were flying the wrong direction at a fraction of their maximum speed, and they weren't going to catch up. They weren't going to get to the area that they needed to be in because of these orders. But all of that went away really when the 9/11 Commission came up with a story that NORAD just wasn't notified until after they crashed anyway. But it's not really a believable overall story. But what's most unbelievable is that the military might have been all these military officers might have been lying for years. Right? Nobody's going to really believe that. It's just that people don't understand the official account, which is that exactly. And there was a book published in January 2003 called Air War Over America. It was published by the Air Force itself, by the Air Force Public Relations Office, in which they interviewed hundreds of military people. And this book was reviewed by all of the top military brass. And it talked about how the military was tracking these planes and how it was intending to shoot down some of them. But all of that testimony was thrown out the window, right? All of that entire book was thrown out the window because the official account ultimately said they never got notification. They were never tracking the planes.
So they're all lying. All these members of the United States military, they're all lying. Have any whistleblowers come forward to put their face to these messages and say, look, I am not lying. I was scrambled that day. We knew about this ahead of time. We had these different minutes, 17 minutes, 47 minutes. We knew about this. Why are they ignoring this?
Well, all of their testimony previously is on the record, and in some cases on the congressional record. So the general who was in charge of NORAD was General Ralph Eberhart. He was the commander of NORAD. He was the commander of U.S. Space Command. And he gave testimony in the U.S. Congress in 2001 saying they had documented evidence, documented notification of Flight 175 and documented notification of the hijacking of Flight 77. This is on the record, the congressional record. And as you probably know, lying to Congress is a felony. It's a major crime. Right? But he never was called out for that because he went along with the official 9/11 Commission account. So basically, the 9/11 Commission, after stating this concept that everybody had been lying or were just terribly mistaken in their memories for a period of 3 years, they did a little negotiation with the NORAD personnel and got them to agree to the idea that they were just so terribly mistaken and they weren't tracking any planes. But it's not going to be one of them, in my opinion, who's going to be a whistleblower, although in some cases maybe a lower level person. There were exercise intelligence agents who were saying they've tracked the planes. This is all in the documentation from the 9/11 Commission. But if one of them wants to come out today and state that, yes, we were definitely tracking the planes, that would be great. But at this point, I'm not aware of any of who have actually done that.
Well, I mean, I think on the record testimony in front of Congress is powerful enough. I mean, to me, that's powerful enough. You also talk about that there are a bunch of questionable characters that were brought in at the FAA who obstructed the response. So there was not only sort of the whitewashing of this testimony, but there was a cover-up of the response and not only that, an impediment, like putting up roadblocks. Can you talk about some of the roadblocks that were thrown out there in this investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. There were two really questionable characters brought into FAA before 9/11. The first one was Benedict Sliney, who was the National Operations Manager for FAA at FAA headquarters. So this guy was on his first day at the job, if you can believe this. It's his first day on the job. He had previously been a lawyer on Wall Street. So he trained a little bit for a couple of months, and then they put him in this job. First day on the job is 9/11. He's the National Operations Manager for FAA, right? And there are a lot of people.
You can't make this up.
No, you can't make this up. So here he is. There are all these people in FAA who have decades of more experience. They're in the same office, but they let him take over and call the shots. And so at 8:15, he was told about the hijacking of American Flight 11. And for some reason, It was 30 minutes later before he notified NORAD, right? They know allegedly. Although the FAA had already communicated via memo to the 9/11 Commission that they had communication bridges with NORAD all along. But this guy, he's stalling, right? He's stalling, and he ultimately used the excuse that he never got a request to authorize a request for military assistance. It's just absurd, right? Because it's an automatic process. It was automatic 129 times in the year 2000, 67 times in the first half of 2001. And suddenly there's all this hesitation about whether we should notify, whether we should request or authorize a request to request. It's just crazy. But this second guy at the FAA who was brought in 9 months before 9/11 came from being the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command. If you're not aware of what that is, that's the military's covert operation command. So, special operations, covert operations, he was running those, and he decided to become the FAA's hijack coordinator, which again is an unusual change of job. But right. when he came, he began running, according to an FAA intelligence employee, whose remarks are on the record for at the 9/11 Commission. General Canavan was his name. General Canavan began conducting tabletop exercises that were, quote, pretty damn close to the 9/11 plot. Right? For the months before 9/11, he was running exercises that were basically mimicking what would happen. But more importantly, on the day of 9/11, General Canavan was missing. This is the role that the 9/11 Commission said was critical in the communication failures between FAA and NORAD. This hijack coordinator at FAA would contact somebody at the military. It was actually the deputy director of operations at the National Military Command Center. And that guy was missing too. Right, so General Canavan's missing for just the more. They never even asked him about it at the 9/11 Commission. This is what we're going to say. Right, where were you? This is the most critical role in communication between FAA and NORAD, and he just went. I guess he said later that he went to Puerto Rico and he just wasn't available, and nobody was identified as his backup. So the most critical role was not that critical on the day of 9/11, apparently. But this FAA, this communications to NORAD went to Winfield. Montague Winfield was a general at the National Military Command Center. He was also missing. And when
they're
you
all
look into it,
on this day.
Well, you look. No kidding. You find out when you look into it, the entire military chain of command was missing. So President Bush, if you're not aware, was at a
kindergarten
visit to an elementary school, right? Reading with kids in an elementary school. The Secret Service was not protecting him. He was there for 35 minutes after the attacks began. It was a highly publicized event. So he was taken out of the picture by just sitting there reading My Pet Goat to the children. The Secretary of Defense was the next line in the military chain of command, and he went missing as well. He didn't know anything about what was going on, he said, until the Pentagon was attacked, at which point he went out into the parking lot and tried to help people with stretchers for more than 30 minutes and couldn't be contacted. It's incredible. These are incredible stories, but they're true. And the next person in the chain of command was Hugh Shelton, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he was out of the country. He was gone to Europe, just mysteriously. And then, Winfield Montague, he was also out and Canavan was out. Everybody was out just for that morning, just for those hours. So that's another big reason why things didn't go very well. But one of the more important reasons was that there were military exercises going on 9/11, and they actually not only mimicked the events, but they obstructed the response. So you may be aware that before 9/11, and a couple of years before 9/11, there were 28 hijack exercise scenarios that the military practiced. And about a quarter of those were suicide missions into high-value targets. right? So people don't hear about this very often, but if you research, you'll find out that the information is there that the military practiced this. And they practiced this on 9/11. There was an exercise called Vigilant Guardian in 2001 that was practiced on 9/11. And it had been going on for a couple of days, but on September 9th, they had practiced the hijacking for a suicide attack against the United Nations building in New York City, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. That's 2 days before 9/11. On September 11th, they were conducting similar hijack events in which they were inserting simulated hijackings into the live air surveillance system. So they call it sim over live. These simulated injections were confusing the people who were supposedly responding. They all thought it was an exercise. And they, in their testimonies to the 9/11 Commission, they say, we thought the exercise had started early. And the evidence shows that the simulated injections continued until after the attacks and definitely disrupted the response.
So you have all of these high-ranking members of the military, the chain of command gone, missing, all of these folks at the FAA missing, gone. You have these simulated attacks being injected in and being run on that particular day. Seems like the perfect, and then you have what many believe, we on this show as well, with the experts we've had here on the show, that these aircraft were remote controlled. They were not piloted by these morons who couldn't pilot a Cessna. They didn't know what they were doing. With precision guide, absolutely not. So these were remote controlled aircraft being manipulated on that particular day, and that's why we don't have jets scrambling to get close to the cockpit to confirm that these pilots are not actually piloting the plane. It all seems, I mean, you look at Occam's razor, right? All of these things point to a massive, massive cover-up, no?
It definitely does. And, you can see the different ways that the 9/11 official account is false. And they all look very much as if it was a cover-up. And, you may know that in the 9/11 Commission report, they didn't even mention some of the major events that happened that day, like the destruction of World Trade Center Building 7 didn't even show up in the report. Right. Or the testimony of the 9/11 hero William Rodriguez or the FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds. These are critical testimonies that never showed up in the report. And this cover-up of the air defenses was really had to come down to, well, everybody was just lying. They weren't tracking the planes. And I can say that 2 years after the 9/11 Commission report came out, they justified this new account. They tried to justify this new account through an article in a magazine called Vanity Fair. And you may remember something that they called the NORAD tapes. So that they suddenly found some tapes, right? Some tapes of that somehow explained away how they didn't really know about it, and the communications failures were the big problem. Well, this reporter, he had gotten privileged access to these NORAD tapes that apparently NORAD didn't even know about, right? So that's amazing in itself. But they tried years later to justify it, but really they never came down to the explanation of why would all these people be lying in order to make themselves look bad. So if you think about this, that's exactly what it is. If they were never notified, they would just have said, we were never notified. How could we possibly have intercepted the jets? But that's not what they said. They said, yes, we were notified with 20 minutes notice on Flight 175, 14 on Flight 170 or 77, and 47 minutes on Flight 93. And we were tracking these planes. It's in detail. They give detailed testimony to this. Generals and colonels and people who we just wouldn't expect to be lying for any reason, particularly for a reason that makes them look bad ultimately.
And also, I remember, on that day, news stations were reporting about the flight over Pennsylvania. And tracking it in real time, right? It had gone missing. Where was it over Pennsylvania? So even news reports, even if you want to discount NORAD or being notified, right? Even like NBC News, the Today Show, and others were reporting about this flight. So they would have been fully aware of this.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And not only that, but air traffic controllers were taking notes. So FOIA released documents show that air traffic controllers were writing notes about having been flight 93 having been hijacked and where it was going on the Ohio and Pennsylvania border long before it crashed. So why would they all just create these fictional accounts that
Right.
it makes no sense whatsoever unless psychologically you really need to believe the official account, which is the case for a lot of people. They just psychologically, I think they really need to believe the official account. So um, you know, whatever way they can do that, they're willing to accept.
I think there's a cognitive dissonance out there, whether it's on the assassination of JFK. They want the official story to be one particular way, one shooter. They don't want the discussions about a conspiracy, which we now know verifiably is the case, whether it's the assassination attempt on President Trump or the 9/11 attacks. And so it's unbelievable to me that the American populace would sit back and say, that's okay. So this 9/11 Commission report, you've left out critical testimony on purpose. FBI whistleblowers, others about these pilots, and there's all sorts of critical information you've purposefully left out of the 9/11 Commission report, or you purposefully didn't interview individuals or ask them critical questions. That's all missing from the official 9/11 report. And I remember at the time when the 9/11 report came out, it was a bestseller. Remember the 9/11 Commission report hit bookstores? Yep. I mean, it was billed by the media as a page turner, a thriller. And you could read it, and it was a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. So it was a lot of media hype and a lot of media pushing of this official fake narrative of what happened that day.
Yeah, and they even came up with if you remember, a comic book version of the 9/11 Commission report. So they thought they could sell it a little bit. Yeah, if you don't remember that, they tried to make it as simple as possible and push it as hard as possible. But the bottom line is that most people, the average citizen, they don't have time to dig into the research, into looking into things and looking at the ever-changing accounts. They just see the 9/11 Commission report and they either support it or they don't. But they don't need a comic book. They need facts. And really, given the impact of 9/11, if people aren't aware, nearly 5 million people were killed in the wars, indirectly and directly. As per Brown University's Cost of War project, nearly 5 million people died in the wars that were justified from 9/11. And additionally, there was an authorization for the use of military force, which is basically the authorization for the president to start preemptive wars whenever he wants to. Presidents have used this since then. Joe Biden used it this year in January of 24 when he drone bombed Iraq. He cited this authorization of use of military force from 2001. So these things, the mass surveillance, the torture, all of this goes back to 9/11. It changed the world in really negative ways and changed our lives and our ability to remain a free democracy in many ways. And people really need to start thinking about looking at 9/11 closely again and seeing where we've been and what we likely will see going forward if we accept these kinds of lies.
And if people are wondering why would they do that? Well, you just answered it, right? It's the rise of the massive military-industrial complex. It's the Patriot Act. It's total control of our lives. It's surveillance, of course. We know Edward Snowden, and his breakthrough reports on what the NSA was doing after 9/11. So all of this combined shows total control. It shows a manipulation of our government. It shows a manipulation of the U.S. dollar. And we are now $35 trillion in debt and over 5 million people killed in these forever wars that we can just perpetuate. Everyone wants to praise Donald Trump. Yeah, he didn't start any new wars, but he extended the drone programs in these regions throughout Syria and these other regions. So yes, you didn't start any new wars, but it's an expansion of what was started after 9/11. It all comes back to that morning. So if anyone out there is wondering why this was all put in place, I think you just answered it. Total control. What are you hoping? What are you hoping we'll see from this, Kevin? This awareness about this. Are you hoping that we'll maybe get a new 9/11 commission, one with fresh eyes? What are you hoping for the families and for America?
That's a good question. I don't believe a new 9/11 commission. I don't believe another government commission uh, will get to the bottom of 9/11 unless it's a foreign government. And there's a possibility because citizens of many countries died on 9/11. But what we're trying to do at the International Center for 9/11 Justice is raise awareness and establish an accurate account of what happened for a number of reasons. One reason I believe is important is that we will see these kinds of things happen again if we haven't already. And we need to be able to recognize them as they're happening as quickly as possible so that we don't allow the government to incorporate all sorts of oppressive measures that will be with us for decades if we don't recognize them and cut them off quickly. So awareness is important so that we can recognize the next event and events that happen in the future.
Hallelujah. Well, Kevin Ryan has been my guest. He's been investigating this for years. He's the co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies, and we thank you so much for all of your research in this and educating all of us about what really happened on that day. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Well, we are continuing our coverage of what really happened on 9/11 and the massive cover-up therein. Joining me now is Aidan Monahan. He's an electrical engineer, author of the book Declassifying 9/11. He's been studying 9/11 since around the year 2006 with a particular focus on how the airplanes were flown on that day and has led the way in researching technology that may have been used to fly those aircraft remotely. Aidan, welcome to the show.
Clayton, thank you for having me.
Why were you drawn to this part of the story? There's any number of pieces of this story, whether it's the Pentagon piece of the story, Flight 93, Building 7, the demolition of the buildings. What drew you to the airplanes themselves and the remote controlling of these airplanes?
Around 2006, 2005, I began to realize that the World Trade Center building destructions were probably the result of sabotage. It was at that time I also concluded that therefore the planes themselves, the attacks by the planes, were by some means that were not reported by the media or federal authorities. And I undertook a effort to find out if there were ways of delivering the airplanes to the targets they met that day by means other than the accused amateur pilots and hijackers themselves.
So talk about the aircraft themselves. Now, you have really drilled in on the idea of the remote control as an engineer. Talk about what you started to uncover regarding the aircraft and in the remote controlling of these aircraft.
In the several years leading up to 9/11, I began to realize that during that time, there was intensive research and development for sort of, as we refer to them, future function aviation technology, relying heavily on GPS compatible avionics packages for aircraft. And I began to realize that during this 5-year or so period, there was intensive R&D underway, relying on Boeing 757, 767 aircraft leased from different entities such as UPS, FedEx, airlines like United, for example, and testing and developing this technology. And coincidentally or not, the planes used in the attacks, for example, were also Boeing 757, 767 planes. And what wound up being the case is the accomplishment of GPS accuracy provided 3 meters left, right, up, and down into these virtual highways in the sky, shall we say. Highly reliable, highly accurate, and it was only available on a R&D basis around 2001. They didn't become formalized for commercial use by the airlines until 2003, once the FAA certified these things. But these systems and capabilities were essentially laying dormant within these aircraft, within the sky above us. The newly activated GPS signal that had only been turned on during May of 2000, about a year and a half prior to the 9/11 attacks themselves.
So this GPS signal was just flipped on these aircraft, but we're led to believe it wasn't being used. Can you explain how that's shocking to me? I didn't know anything about that.
Yes, the built into the GPS servers for many years were deliberately installed errors to deter foreign enemy abuse. And in May rather of 2000, the Defense Secretary Cohen under Clinton activated per his order the the service that eliminated those errors and included the newly augmented capabilities. Wide area augmentation system, long story short, refers to a ground-based, how do we say, aspect of the network added to the service. It's a long story, a little difficult to summarize, but in that case, in any event, these avionics packages were scheduled for installation during 98 and 99, according to the airlines, that supported these functions, which were not being used for commercial use, as I said, until about 2003. So for a period of about 4 or 5 years, from 98 to about 2003, these capabilities were available technically, although not officially. So essentially, they were dormant aboard these planes for about 4 or 5 years.
And what does this technology allow people to do? Is that the remote controlled access point, or what exactly is that doing, that GPS technology?
The remote aspect of the bigger picture refers to the capability of airlines and other entities with the technical capability of transmitting entire flight plan, waypoints, and data remotely via radio frequency, which can automatically self-install into the flight management systems of these planes. So technically speaking, that would be referred to or viewed as a remote capability.
So remote capability to be able to control these aircraft. And I didn't realize, so you described as 3 meters up and down and left and right. That's the precision with which that technology was laying dormant in these aircraft? Like we had that technology, it was laying dormant inside of these aircraft and we didn't know about it?
Well, certainly the industry knew, the professionals knew. The capabilities were there in anticipation of the eventual official use starting in 2003. So these were brand new avionics packages in anticipation of this service and these capabilities and the desire to use them for commercial purposes.
Okay, so let's talk about this technology and who might have had access to this. When you started peeling this onion back, what did you find in terms of who could have put this here, who might have had a motive to control these aircraft? Take us through that part of the story now.
Well, there's one character in particular, Dob Zakheim of the Bush White House, a known neoconservative who led a company called System Planning Corporation, which developed a platform by which unmanned or unpiloted, according to their reports, aerial vehicles could be interfaced through their flight control systems in order to turn various aerial vehicles around, for example, should the need arise or desire arise, and return these flying vehicles, pilotless vehicles, to a base of their choice, a runway of their choice, for example. There are other broader aspects of the technology, but that particular aspect of this interface certainly caught my attention and some others as well.
So bring me to 9/11 then. And so what do you think happened on that day with these aircraft?
There's one video in particular of United 175, the one that everyone saw on television at 9:02, I believe, that morning. And about 30 videos, there's one in particular that allows the viewer to see the plane flying toward the camera from some miles distant for about a mile or a mile and a half, for about 5 to 8 seconds. I have to double check my numbers there, but it's that one video that allows us to observe the bank angle utilized. We know already, thanks to government reports, what the ground speeds were, crosswind speeds, therefore airspeeds. And from these foundational numbers, we can therefore branch off into other calculations, relying on trigonometry and so on. And as a result, we can see that this plane was essentially, long story short, and I spelled this out in some papers I published, the plane was on target about 1.5 to 6 miles from the target, while traveling at about 800 feet per second. And what's telling, a telling takeaway from all that is that if what we see on video occurs 1 second sooner or later than observed, the initiation of the bank angle, the start time, etc., the plane necessarily misses the building by 800 feet while traveling at 800 feet per second, which seems to be beyond even a competent human pilot's control, much less the accused amateurs.
Right. So, okay, let me just unpack that a little bit. This video that we're seeing here, this 1.5 mile turn, is so precise that even advanced pilots who have been flying for 30 years or more say that they wouldn't be able to pull off this maneuver. And that, so in your estimation, your expertise, it could have only been performed with this precision at this descent on the human body by remote control. Like no pilot could have really pulled this off. Is that what you're saying?
I've heard professionals refer to it as very challenging, to say the least. What you see in the video is a plane in a 10,000 foot descent per minute, wings level. It then goes behind smoke, reappears. By this time, it's banked at a 20-degree angle. About 2.5 seconds before impact, it rotates another 18 degrees to 38 degrees. But using trigonometry, I've been able to show that that final 18-degree twist at the end was not necessary to achieve impact. And so we're looking at something comparable to a half. Oh, sorry, I apologize. What we're looking at is something comparable to a half-court shot in basketball.
And so what would have accounted for that last second 18-degree turn? Why would that have been performed? What was the purpose of that?
Yeah, that's a question that had been on my mind until I concluded myself, and this is just my personal opinion, that it did create an impression for the observer of reckless, imperfect human pilot control. It was noted in the media by some reporters that the plane appeared to be desperately trying to achieve impact via a desperate last-second bank. But using trigonometry, that the plane would have hit the building regardless of the final 18-degree rotation.
So it was done for show, basically, in order to further the propaganda that this was a pilot in a fight with a box cutter fighting to bank this plane into the towers.
Yes, as so many things are lately, it may very well have been just for appearance sake and to increase an impression of plausibility for the official account.
Let's take a look at some of these images that also you've sent over. What are we seeing here? Let's take through. So I guess this is a still image here of one of the towers being, one of the other tower being on fire. What are we seeing here in this black and white image?
That is a composite of one of the frames, actually two of the frames from the video I described, and I just provide that for your reference and any of the viewers themselves. As I mentioned, we see a plane at wings level, rapid 10,000 foot per minute descent. It goes behind smoke, reappears at a 20-degree bank angle, and then maintains that very steadily all the way into the target until the last 2.5 seconds, at which time it then rotates another 18 degrees at impact for a 38-degree impact angle.
Now take me through this sort of wind tunnel image here. What is this?
That, I believe, is a Boeing industry illustration of what was hoped to be representative of these virtual highways in the sky, which was the objective in the late 90s, to replace these legacy navigational aids such as VOR, DME, INS as well, or not INS, but ILS, correction. And the industry was was planning to phase these out pretty rapidly with the appearance of this new technology. So that's basically what you're looking at. It's for the general viewer, an illustration by the industry. I think it was Boeing specifically who put that together.
And is the idea that we would go pilotless for UPS, FedEx flights, that these would all be loaded up with packages and pilots wouldn't have to be involved in this process any longer?
Eventually, I think that is a goal, although there are some hurdles and obstacles in the way of that. But what most people don't realize is even on their typical coast-to-coast 4-hour flight from New York or Boston to LA, for example, the pilot is actually only hand controlling the plane for about 3 minutes, 90 at takeoff, 90 seconds at landing, and the rest of the time the airplane is on autopilot itself. It's actually a more stable option for flight than, shall we say, a human pilot control of the plane, a plane.
And in your evidence, it appears, and we've covered this on the show as well, that there appears to be no way, or virtually impossible, if not impossible, for these pilots, these alleged hijackers, to have had any kind of control maneuvering this type of aircraft with that type of descent, with those types of maneuvers, with that precision, when these pilots were inexperienced at best, had very little time, if any, in a simulator. Is that what your evidence has also uncovered?
It seems to have, yes. For example, Flight 175, while descending at 10,000 feet per minute at the very end, radar returns infer that there was a last second increase in speed, which requires the right hand or left hand to control the thrust lever control of the aircraft, while with the other hand maintaining steering with the control stick with the other free hand, all while dealing with what were probably very high G forces as the plane leveled out from its 10,000 foot per minute rapid descent into the building. It seems like a challenge even for a professional, much less an accused amateur.
Right. I've spoken to Marine Corps pilots who say, no, we wouldn't be able to do that. Marine Corps pilots, okay, you can't pull that off, then how is a hijacker with almost no flight experience able to pull that off? It's remarkable, really. This other image here that I want to look at on your screen that you sent as well, this open plan office with the express elevators and the wingspan here. What are we looking at here, and why is this important?
That is a composite I created of the dimensions of the items of interest in this whole scenario: the building, the plane, and the virtual highway in the sky referred to earlier. The highest degree of accuracy was referred to as RNP 0.02. It's a nautical mile measure, and the highest degree of accuracy around 2002, 2003, according to the publication, achieved for this system was 0.02 nautical miles, which is 200 and which is actually 123 feet, which is a radial measure for a total diameter of 243 feet. 123 left, 123 right, up and down, for a total of 243. Sorry for all the math, but that's the nautical mile measure for accuracy. And what you see in the image, the composite, of course, is the nice fit of the building, of the airplane, into this virtual highway in the sky. And technically, and it just establishes the plausibility of this suspicion of mine and others for some other means of control other than the accused.
On a scale of 1 to 100, Aidan, 100 being, 100% likely that these were remote controlled, where do you come down on this after all this years of research and evidence? 100%? 80%? 50%? Where do you come down on this?
Probably close to 100. There's just there's such a precision involved, at least in the flight of 175. As well, what I forgot to mention was this new technology, this GPS technology, supported ascending and descending turns within these virtual highways in the sky, these tiny little quarters, relatively speaking. The legacy nav aids like VOR, DME simply did not support these capabilities for many difficult to explain reasons. But the GPS did. It was reported by a Stanford publication in 1998. And this is what you see in the case of the Pentagon flight, a 270-degree descending turn. With 175, you see the same thing, a descending turn, and as well, even Flight 11 apparently was also via a descending turn. It was banked at about, I forgot the exact number of degrees at impact, but it was also descending and banking. So therefore, you have 3 at least of the 4 planes hitting targets via this very means described in Stanford publications around 1998.
An incredibly difficult maneuver to pull off, even for advanced pilots, to do a descending turn like this, facing G-forces, controlling both levers, both the thrust and the steering column as well, trying to maneuver this plane. Yeah, it doesn't add up at all. I'll get you out of here on this, Aidan. When we talked earlier about under the Clinton administration, but who do you think, what organizations would have had sort of a control center, a booth somewhere that maybe had the capabilities to be controlling these craft? Do we know beyond what you sort of mentioned a little bit at the beginning, but was there any sort of organization that your evidence has led you in finger pointing that they were probably the ones responsible for controlling these craft, or do we not know that?
I referred earlier to Dobbs Atcom, a neoconservative PNAC signatory, running a company that ran, or rather developed a platform by which 9/11 itself could have very well been pulled off, so to speak. Apparently, according to one publication, this platform could support up to 5 aircraft or more, which is what you had on 9/11. You had 4, and so that system is highly suspect, especially given the parties involved, other organizations. The Department of Defense certainly, perhaps some entities within the airline system itself, certainly the White House. That's where your command and control stops and starts.
My guest has been Aidan Monahan. His book is called Declassifying 9/11. He's been studying 9/11 since around 2006. And all of this remote control technology, it's fascinating. And thank you for shedding light on this. We've really been doing a deep dive on this part of the story, and I'm thrilled that you're able to provide even more context here in things that we haven't discussed yet on our show. So thank you for bringing a whole level of detailed analysis that we haven't yet featured here on the show. Thank you so much, Aidan. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you, Clayton.
Well, last week, a video surfaced of the attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11. Twitter users posted this video as if it was brand new, never seen before. It might have been never seen for many of us. Turns out that's not true. This video was not new at all. It was broadcast years ago on television. But why was it buried? And what does it show us? And why has it suddenly surfaced during the same week that President Biden steps down from running for re-election? President Trump is nearly assassinated and gives a speech at the RNC. This news surfaces during that same week. It is curious indeed. Ted Walter, he's the executive director for the International Center for 9/11 Justice. He's dedicated his life to getting answers for the families and the victims of 9/11. He's also the director of Peace, War, and 9/11, which is available on their channel, a documentary you can watch. And Ted joins us now. No better authority on this probably in the world to dissect this video. Now, the video, Ted, has been viewed like 50 million times. And of course, it was put out there as this is brand new video. But can you explain to our audience, is this video new or just resurfaced?
Yeah, so as I was analyzing the video, I discovered that it actually had aired before, at least about 10 seconds or so, showing the collapse of the South Tower, which was the first building to go down on 9/11. So that little segment has aired on Sky News and a Washington, D.C. affiliate of CBS. However, the filmmaker or the videographer, Case Sugimoto, released about 57 minutes of footage. And so most of that has never been seen before, and it contains a lot of valuable information. And the portion of the South Tower that had been seen before is also now, we have it in a much better quality, so we can actually see a lot more things that we couldn't see before. So it is pretty significant.
Now, we should point out, of course, your position, I think our position here at Redacted, is that this was a controlled demolition of the towers and that these airplanes were not the reason these towers came down. Is that an accurate description of your position on this?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that the Twin Towers, as well as World Trade Center Building 7, were brought down by controlled demolition. So, and this video certainly confirms that in numerous ways.
All right, let's talk about it. So let's get into it. So this new video that people have never seen before, a large portion of it, confirms a controlled demolition of the towers on 9/11. Can you go through some of the points here that you'd like to make, and we can call out what caught your eye kind of looking at this new footage?
Yeah, so I think the thing that stood out to most people when they saw this was the flashes that are very visible. Particularly, there's a line of flashes on the lower portion of the building as the top starts to go down. I would also love to draw people's attention to a very bright flash that occurs further up on the building, and this is on the northeast corner of the South Tower. And when you think about it, there's no reason for a bright flash, if this is just a natural building collapse, to be occurring well above the impact zone or well above where the collapse is actually happening. But we see this bright flash, and we also see structural damage to the corner of the building very close to it. And so naysayers will say, well, those are just, who knows what that is? That's just the sun reflecting off the windows. Well, we know that this is actually something else other than that. And we think that it's a demolition charge because you can actually identify the same flash in numerous videos. If you line up the videos and you can do this carefully and line them up. And we actually just published a paper 2 months ago in the Journal of 9/11 Studies that has done this meticulous analysis that shows that this particular flash can be seen in numerous videos. So there's no way that if it's a reflection from the sun off of a window that you're going to see that same flash at that same moment from numerous angles. It can only be seen from one angle. And so we get this bright flash, and so you can look at the video of that. I've provided that video so your viewers can see it. We've kind of pointed out where that flash is. And very close to that flash, kind of where the arrow is pointing, you also see structural damage being done to the corner of the building. Again, if you have the top that's falling and it's a rigid block, right, and the damage that should be done to that portion of the building should be at the bottom. Why is there structural damage being inflicted upon a part of the building that's it's 10 or 15 stories higher, right? And so in that paper I mentioned in the Journal of 9/11 Studies by a researcher named Soren Korsgaard, he looks at that damage from a few different angles. Now that we have this video, we can really see that damage even much better. It's basically a big hole in the corner of the building. So if it's just window light reflecting off of windows, it's not going to cause damage, to that kind of damage to the building. But so we see that severe structural damage associated with the flash and a couple of flashes way above the impact zone. So
this really confirms what you've already seen. I mean, that's powerful, right? I mean, even without this video, you were able to determine that there were charges going off above where we were supposed to have this impact zone.
Yes. So and I provided a second video for your viewers to see, where it's another video where the researcher Soren Korsgaard identified this flash from another angle. And this is filmed by a guy named Anthony Rosario. And I mean, you can see the flash there very brightly. Notice that you can't see it you can't see the damage to the building as well because it's from a different angle. But what that shows you is that this flash actually was a very three-dimensional event. It wasn't just, it was sticking out far from the building, right? So the new footage helps us really solidify what we knew, and it provides a much better view of the actual damage. And of course, shows the video to tens of millions of people who've now seen it.
For someone who's just learning about this for the first time, wait a minute, there were demolition charges that brought down the towers? There were all sorts of eyewitnesses, firefighters, police officers, eyewitnesses who confirmed explosions and demolition charges going off, did they not?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's upwards of 200 eyewitness accounts of explosions going off during the collapse of the towers. The great majority of them are first responders, such as firefighters or Port Authority police officers, but also several dozen news reporters. In fact, I co-authored a paper where we identified 36 reporters who basically described the collapse of the buildings as being an explosion or being brought down by explosives or that sort of thing, or seeing, explosions running down the face of the building. So there's overwhelming wealth of eyewitness evidence that explosions were taking place.
And of course, Building 7, which people said, it was collateral damage, basically hit by the falling Twin Towers. There's no evidence of that whatsoever, and that it collapsed with, again, demolition charges, it appears, separate from the Twin Towers. It was not touched by the Twin Towers collapse at all. Am I right?
There was some damage done to the south face of the building, which was the face of Building 7 that was facing the towers. But it was, I won't call it minor damage, because that will seem like I'm trying to downplay it. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which conducted the official investigation into the collapse of all three buildings, concluded that the damage to the building didn't actually contribute to the collapse. The damage, it was all due to fires, and that even if that damage had not taken place, if the fires had just traveled through the same fires had traveled through the building, they would have brought the building down anyway, allegedly. So all that the debris from the North Tower allegedly did was start these fires. That's even a question if the debris could have started those fires. Many researchers believe that the fires were set intentionally around noon in order to have a cover story for why the building would go down.
And what was in Building 7?
Oh, so good question. There were many government agencies, federal agencies, as well as a city agency inside the building. And we're talking about, the Secret Service, the FBI, the CIA, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was at the time conducting very important investigations into the WorldCom and Enron scandals. And then you had the Emergency Operations Center for the Office of Emergency Management of New York City that was installed just a couple years before 9/11 on the 23rd floor. And so, it's very suspicious that the Emergency Operations Center was evacuated so quickly on the morning of 9/11. And there's well-known eyewitness accounts of explosions. Two men who tried to go up to the 23rd floor, found it deserted, tried to make their way back down, and witnessed explosions when they got to around the 8th floor of the building. And the official story tries to say that that was actually just the North Tower collapsing onto the building. But we have when you look at the timeline for their account, there's no way that they would have only made it down to the 8th floor at 10:28 when the North Tower collapsed. It clearly happened much earlier, and they both clearly reported explosions. And we have actual reports of significant structural damage inside of Building 7, elevator cars being ejected from their shafts. So that's not going to be caused by debris hitting the outside of the building. If you got an elevator car sitting 40 feet outside of its shaft, that means basically an explosion pushed that elevator car out of the shaft.
Wow. Yeah, it's very convenient, all of the documents and things that were scorched in the collapse of Building 7 in these investigations. Very, very interesting. So I want to go back to the video here before we get you out of here, Ted. So we talked about the flashing. What else stood out to you about this new footage that's emerged?
Yeah, so there's other really interesting things you can see. I think there was a very good view of a squib, or an expulsion of debris and air that occurred just below the impact zone, really before the top of the building started to come down. And my friend and colleague Richard Gage made that observation, or his team made that observation and put it out on his social media. And so you can see the video of that, which I provided for your audience. And then I found a second video. Once I saw that, I was like, wow, found a second video of that. There's just no reason for a squib to be starting to shoot out of the building before the top begins to come down. And really, you had a massive hole in the building, right, where the plane went in. So there's no reason that air would be pushed out of nearby parts of the building. If the top starts to come down, the air will just be pushed out the hole. And yet you've got this squib shooting out of the southeast corner of the South Tower, right about as the building starts to go down. So you can see that from a few different angles. I think the other really fascinating thing, and this goes to the sort of the historical significance of this video, in case Sugimoto releasing it, is his friends who watched the first tower go down. And then when people that they were with started asking them about it, they all said, "Oh, we think it went down. It was an explosion. We think." And one of the witnesses said, "Yeah, I don't think it was the fires." And so I think that's a real, it's another, there are numerous other examples of that. People who were recording the event, but watching it outdoors, who were not that far away, who that's what they perceived as soon as as the building came down. And, your viewers can watch a couple of those videos, which I also provided. They're very powerful. And I think it's significant because it shows people, oh yeah, the original interpretation of what happened, the dominant view of most people who actually watched this event, who were close to it, who were eyewitnesses, they interpreted it as an explosion or as some kind of a demolition or the building blowing up. They did not interpret this as a natural building collapse. And I think that's, for people that are coming to this for the first time, it helps to realize that this theory, quote unquote theory, started from the second the buildings came down, and that's what most people who are close by observed. And so it's a natural way to interpret the event that you're seeing. And in fact, the idea that it was a structural failure caused by fires was really introduced afterwards. In the hours after these buildings went down, that's when you start to see the media saying, "Oh, it looks like it was a structural failure. It looks like the airplanes and the fires caused it." And all the reporters who were on the ground saying that it was an explosion, their accounts were ignored by their colleagues in the studios and so on. So I think
a lot of those reporters' footage has been really blocked and hard to find, right? So the official, a lot of these reporters who were there on the ground at the time, one of my colleagues at Fox News standing there on the ground talking about explosions and interviewing eyewitnesses and first responders about explosions that they were hearing. Good luck trying to find those videos today. Thank God for Twitter being able to resurface some of them, but you will not find them on the official news websites of the broadcast networks that initially aired those interviews, right?
Oh yeah, you can't find them anywhere related to the Fox News or any of the other channels that aired them. You can find them on our website, our YouTube channel. You can find them on the websites of our colleagues in our community who are still researching this and trying to get to the bottom of what happened that day and get the truth out and hold some people accountable. So it is still out there in certain places that are preserving it.
I mean, at the heart of this is the families, it's the people that lost their lives, and they were sold a bill of goods. They were sold lies, right? That this was brought down by terrorists who hijacked airplanes, and we know that nothing could be further from the truth. And this is, I think, why you've dedicated your life to getting answers for the families. What have you heard from the families? Any of the victims' families in the wake of this new footage, and what have they said about this?
I haven't communicated with anybody, any family members specifically about this new footage. I've been in touch with a couple family members for other reasons, other projects that we're working on, including the inquest, the Campbell family, the family of Jeff Campbell trying to open a new inquest in the UK, but not about this footage. I'm sure they've seen it, and for those families who've been fighting for almost 23 years to get the truth, the footage for them is nothing new. But I think it helps to see that it'll encourage them that tens of millions of people are seeing this footage for the first time, and that's the dominant discussion. If you were on X or on another platform, it's not just, oh hey, we found some new video of 9/11, this important event from 20 years ago. It's there's this new footage, and the dominant discussion is, it looks like a controlled demolition. What are those flashes? So that's really it is a positive.
Well, Ted Walter, we appreciate you joining us again. He's the executive director for International Center for 9/11 Justice. You can go to their YouTube channel. Can you name your YouTube channel so people can go check out some of these additional videos if they want to do more of a deep dive?
Yeah, I think if you search IC911 on YouTube, you'll find us, and IC911.org is the website where you can also find a lot of this material.
Ted, great to see you. Thank you so much for the great work as always.
It's great to be with you, Clayton. Thank you for having me back, and thanks for all the work that you do as well.